Okay, picture this. It's Friday morning, June 13th, 2025. Prayers are happening in Tehran, and then bam, explosions. Not some covert, this was openly authorized by Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, hitting critical Iranian military and nuclear sites. The world just sort of stopped. And before anyone could really process it, Iran retaliated. Drones hitting Israeli-linked targets.
Yeah. And look, these tit-for-tat things, they happen. Sadly, it's almost familiar in the Middle East. But this felt different. The openness of it, Netanyahu claiming it, the timing, it just massively raises the stakes. And Iran, right away, pointed the finger not just at Israel, but saw American complicity. Suddenly, there are warnings. U.S. bases in Iraq, Syria, Qatar, Bahrain, they could be next. This isn't just another regional flare-up. It feels bigger.
Right. That's exactly what we need to get into today on the deep dive. Our mission here is to really unpack this unilateral strike. How does it potentially trap the U.S. in a conflict it didn't ask for? And what are these ripple effects we're already seeing across the globe, really? We'll look at the immediate fallout, the complex reasons why such a bold move might happen now, and what does it mean for you listening, for the global economy, for international stability? We really want to zero in on this idea of a trap, especially for President Trump. Newly reelected, remember, and he's been pretty vocal about wanting out of foreign messes, not deeper in. And this strike, reportedly, happened without even a heads up to Washington. So let's start there. Let's break down that initial strike on June 13th and the immediate chain reaction. Explosions in Tehran, military sites, nuclear facilities. Key detail, as you said, Netanyahu openly taking credit. What was the immediate blowback from that openness?
Well, Iran's response was fast and predictable in that it happened. Drones were launched practically the same evening against Israeli-linked targets. But like we said, hitting Tehran on a Friday during prayers and being so blatant about it, that changes the game. Iran immediately signaling that U.S. bases were potential targets. That shows they weren't just seeing this as Israel acting alone. They perceived U.S. involvement, or at least quiet approval, and that instantly dragged Washington onto the main stage, wanted or not.
Which brings us right to the impact on the U.S. Because even if Washington had zero input on the planning, they're still Israel's main ally, the main arms supplier. So they face consequences regardless. It's this weird situation, isn't it? You've got President Trump just won re-election, basically campaigned on no more endless wars, even called out Zelensky, for not talking peace. And now his closest ally in the region kicks off a crisis that could pull the U.S. right back in. So maybe the point isn't just Trump's platform, but something bigger, like how easily an ally's actions can derail even a superpower's plans.
Forcing their hand. That's exactly the bind. It's fascinating because you saw this fatigue, right, with Middle East conflicts. Both Biden before him and Trump now expressed it. And that reflects what a lot of Americans feel after, decades in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then Netanyahu makes this move, apparently without consulting the U.S., and it just cuts right across that public feeling, potentially dragging America into a crisis. And the trap part is, if the U.S. says nothing, does that look like approval? In geopolitics, perception is often reality. So Washington's options suddenly become very limited, and maybe none of them look good. They kind of lose control of the narrative, and maybe their policy too.
Okay, so if the U.S. is in this tough spot, you have to ask, why would Netanyahu do this now? Knowing the potential blowback, knowing the risk for the U.S. relationship, especially when he's got his own problems at home. I mean, corruption trials hanging over him, big protests, coalition partners pushing and pulling. Could this strike be like a political gamble, a way to change the subject, rally his base, look like the strong protector?
It could be, but you have to ask, how risky is that gamble? If Iran hits back harder, if things really escalate, could that actually make Israel's internal divisions worse? Remember, the trauma from October 7th, 2023, that's still incredibly raw. And polls weren't exactly showing overwhelming support for his leadership before this. So yeah, maybe it shores up some support short term, but if it spirals, it could backfire badly. And that loops right back to Trump's problem. He ran on peace through strength. But now, what if Iran does hit U.S. bases? He's forced to react. Does he use military force? Does he show restraint? Either way, it potentially undermines his whole America first, stay out of it approach. It puts him in a real no-win situation.
And moving beyond the immediate military and political chess game, the economic impact, that was felt almost instantly, right? Brent crude oil prices, they jumped over 10% by midday in Asia, Kuala Lumpur time. And analysts were immediately warning this could get much worse if the conflict spreads. You could almost feel the market seize up.
Oh, absolutely. And connect that globally. Think about Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines. These are major oil importers. A price spike like that means immediate inflationary pressure, pain at the pump, higher prices for everything, plus, global supply chains. They were already stressed, weren't they? From trade disputes, tariffs. Now you throw this major geopolitical shock into the mix. Things start looking really shaky. The markets aren't just nervous, they're genuinely worried about major disruption. It's not contained.
And it's important to remember this wasn't necessarily inevitable. There were other things happening, like diplomatic efforts. Remember that ASEAN GCC China summit? Those were attempts to build bridges, economic ties, cultural links, trying to dial down tensions through cooperation, through dialogue.
Exactly. And a strike like Netanyahu's just throws a massive wrench into all of that. It's kind of a brutal lesson, isn't it? That in these really volatile areas, missiles can just shout down diplomacy. All that careful work building connections, it can be shattered pretty quickly by one calculated move, undermines the whole foundation for trying to talk things out.
Okay, so given how fast this unfolded and how wide the fallout is, what now? What's the path forward? It feels like urgent diplomacy isn't just an option. It's like critical,
Yeah.
absolutely essential to stop this from blowing up completely.
Yeah, concrete steps are needed, like yesterday. The U.S. needs to be working channels to Tehran, maybe through partners like Turkey or Qatar or, neutral Europeans. Get talking. Israel needs some very clear, firm advice that escalating this further helps nobody in the long run. And Iran needs to see that, going too far in retaliation could break even the fragile diplomatic links that still exist. Washington has to be decisive here, publicly state they didn't back this specific strike, but also make it clear, look, attacks on U.S. interests will get a response, a measured one, but a firm one. Ultimately, isn't this the test for great powers, preventing wars, not getting dragged into them? This really puts that to the test.
Yeah, there was that line in the source material that really stuck with me, really captured it. Netanyahu lit the fuse. Others must ensure it doesn't ignite the powder keg. That says it all, really. So wrapping this up, what does it all mean for you listening to this? What we've kind of walked through today shows how one ally's actions, even if they seem independent, can set off this huge chain reaction. The economic impact, the geopolitical shifts, it goes way beyond the immediate region. The whole world is watching now. Not just Tehran and Tel Aviv. It's Washington, Riyadh, Doha, Kuala Lumpur. Everyone's holding their breath.
And it leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? In a world like this, where allies can go rogue, essentially, and spark a crisis, how does a superpower like the U.S. balance loyalty to partners with, its own interests and the need for stability? What does it actually take for a leader to prevent a war instead of just reacting once the fuse is lit by someone else? This whole situation really forces us to think about how we manage these complex alliances and ambitions in a world that feels more connected and maybe more volatile than ever. A single match can threaten the whole system.